I've been racing since I was 7 years old. Every discipline of motocross I've raced, from motocross to supercross, arena cross. Pushing the limits and not knowing what's around the corner, that's what excites me about off-road, the unknown. Step by step, I'm going to break down and show you how to be a better off-road rider and racer. From single track to rocks, mud, roots, logs, sand, whatever the single track throws at you, I'm going to make sure you're prepared for it. So follow me if you can, and I'll show you what's possible. So body positioning. One thing I like to do is pinch with my knees. It leaves my upper body to be a little bit looser and saves me energy in my upper body. I don't get as tight up top. Use your legs as much as possible. Your legs are definitely stronger than your arms. So use your knees and to pinch your body in the middle of your bike as much as you can. Elbows up. Always have your elbows up. If you drop your elbows down, you just have no strength that way. The bike wants to do what it wants to do at that point. If your elbows are up, you're actually in attack position, I call it, and you're ready for anything at all times. It's real important to be located in the center of your bike. That's where your foot pegs are, and that's where your bike works, is dead center of your bike. It doesn't put too much pressure on the front or the rear suspension. And then I ride on my toes a lot. Just gives you that little bit more extra suspension, maybe maybe 2 or 3 inches extra suspension, and you can track around a little more. If you're back here, you're almost like planted and you're stuck in that position. So if you're in your balls of your feet, you can definitely twist your body around and manipulate the bike a little bit more. Obviously sit in the middle of your bike when you come up to corners, and then I always like to use my fingers on my clutches and on my clutch and my front brake. Always keep them on there at all times. You never know when you might need to pop your clutch and get over a log or a rock, or even use your front brake to get you to stop into a corner because it came up on it just a little bit too fast. The fingers that I like to use the most, I use my 2 fingers, my index finger and my middle finger on my clutch, and then on my front brake I use my index finger. And a lot of people, they use different fingers. Whatever you feel most comfortable with is what you're going to feel comfortable with, and just go with that. So turning is 90% of the race, is making the corners and making them smooth as possible. I like to always keep my body position up on the tank. Gives you a little bit more front tire feel. Obviously have your legs out. If your leg's back here and you're dragging it, it's going to catch the ground, and it's going to want to pull you back down to the ground. So I always like to keep your feet up off the dirt. So I always like to keep it up here. So weighting your outside peg is just as important as keeping your foot up. So you want to keep your outside peg always weighted when you're turning. It just keeps your bike more planted. Gives you a better feel into the corner. So looking ahead is important. Keeping your focus about 20 to 30 yards ahead of you is definitely helps you out with ruts, with hill climbs, anything that's going to come your way. You have an idea what direction you want to go. If you're standing up, I like to be toes on the foot pegs, head up, elbows up. Just looking ahead. If you're looking down at your front fender or at the ground, you're not going to know what's coming ahead of you, especially if you're moving at a fast pace. You're not going to see what's coming next, so you're going to end up getting yourself into trouble. So always look ahead. It definitely will help you out in the long run. So the bad things about body positioning is obviously the first thing that comes to mind to me is having your elbows down. No strength there. Number two, I see it a lot. A lot of people ride way too far back on the bike. If they're turning, or if they're just going down a straightaway, or if they're just going, just anything, doing rocks, logs, they're always too far back. The problem is with being too far back, they have no control over the front end. The bike, if you're too far back, the bike is light on the front wheel, and the bike just wants to go anywhere that the front wheel, if a rock hits the front wheel and it bounces it to the right, it's going to go that direction. If you're up on the front of the bike, it's more balanced, or in the middle of the bike, the center of the bike, it's more balanced. It's easier to correct yourself, and it's just easy to manipulate the bike to where you want it to go. If you're back on the bike's going to go wherever the bike's going to go. Hill climbs. I love doing hill climbs. Hill climbs could be the most fun you can possibly have, and you can spend all day on one hill climb. Especially the ones that are really tough and you can't make, and it takes you a few times. To be a successful hill climber, you always got to be committed once you get to the hill climb. Never second guess yourself. Pick a line and stick to it. Once you're heading up the hill, you always want to be in a neutral position on your bike. If it gets really steep and there's a lot of traction, obviously you want to climb up on the tank a little bit more, but keep a nice, easy throttle with your clutch in your hand at all times. Use your feet and your knees to push the bike side to side, to turn it to which direction you need to go. So gearing on a hill climb, once you get to the hill climb, you're going to try to be in the gear that you want to stick with. Listen to your motor. The motor will tell you exactly what gear you should be in or you should not be in. If the hill is really steep and you need to pull a gear, then pull a gear and just stick with the gear. If you get to the top and the bike starts to bog down a little bit, then shift down. Just use your knowledge of what gear you should be in. Using your clutch going up a hill, you always want to have your two fingers on your clutch at all times. Once you're going up, maybe try to slip the clutch just a little bit to get that traction. If the bike wants to start coming up on you, maybe just ride the clutch just a little bit so that it pulls the front end back down. Never hit your brakes. Always keep the throttle on. Use your clutch as your brake while you're going up the hill. So if you don't make it up a hill climb and you get stuck halfway up the hill, the most important thing that you need to know is lock up your front brake, keep the motor running if possible, jump off the bike to the high side of your bike, never jump to the low side of your bike. Getting in the angle of the hill, the side hill, turning your front wheel back down towards the bottom of the hill, jumping back on it, head back down, nice and smooth. I do not recommend bulldogging your bike or trying to walk your bike down the hill. It's definitely more dangerous than just jumping on your bike and trying to ride it back down. So here we are on the really loose uphill. First thing is that you need to remember is to keep your body in the central position, center of the bike, keeping the gas on, keeping momentum going up this hill. Definitely want to use your knees to manipulate the bike to create traction. But momentum is your key going uphill, and try to miss the biggest rocks, try to find the best line. You know, you want to just keep momentum. Momentum is key on any kind of uphill. Like I said before, use your legs to manipulate the bike a little bit to create traction. Use your legs to grip the bike so your arms are loose. when you're going to turn and switch directions, really you're not wanting to turn your handlebars, you just want to use your knees to push side to side, and that will manipulate the bike to go which direction you want it to go. So coming up to this hill, loose, rocky uphill, you want to be obviously in the right gear. I was in second gear, just at a good pace, nothing too, you don't want to be too, what I would call whiskey throttle. You just want to keep a nice, steady flow on the throttle all the way up. If you want to start gaining speed, then just start twisting the throttle a little bit, little by little. Don't go and just whack it, because then it's going to end up hitting a rock and spitting you sideways, and you're going to slow yourself down, and it's going to be a loss of time. The don'ts is being in the wrong gear is going to affect your drive. If you're in too low of a gear, obviously it's going to spin, you're going to pick up a rock, it's going to spit you sideways, and you're going to be probably coming back down the hill or sideways in the trail, and your buddy's going to end up running into you. So being in the right gear is definitely important. Another don't is keeping your feet on the pegs at all times. As soon as your feet come off the foot pegs, you're going to lose a bunch of traction, and the bike's going to want to spit sideways, and you're going to be stuck on the hill and wondering how you're going to get up this hill. So if you get stuck on a real marbly uphill like this one here, first of all, you need to maybe stop what you're doing, get straight, and get in the right gear, feet off the pegs. Once you ease the clutch out, get the bike moving, and once you get moving, throw your feet back up on the foot pegs to get maximum traction, lean back just a hair, and start pedaling up the hill. At that point, you should be moving in a forward momentum, and your feet should be on the foot pegs at that point, and by that time you should be on and up the hill. Now if the hill is too steep and there's no possible way that you're going to be able to stop in the middle of the hill and get going again, then the best situation you need to do is just turn the bike back around, get back to the bottom of the hill, and start from fresh. So rutted up hills. The thing you need to know about rutted up hills is obviously just when you're coming up to it, you need to be committed the whole time. You need to be looking ahead, looking to where you're actually going to be going, not where you are going at that point. You need to be looking ahead, maybe 20, 30 yards up the hill. When I went up to it, I started out to the left, got in a pretty big rut, and then I crossed over all the ruts and made my way all the way over to the right to a better rut. It seemed like it was just a little bit smoother. It seemed like it was just going to take me to the spot where I needed to go a little bit easier without having to fight the bike. Doing that, I was obviously the hands on the clutch at all times, working the clutch a little bit. You want to be standing up and just basically using your knees and your legs just to let the bike flow in between you and let it just follow in the rut a little bit. So when I was crossing up over the ruts, I sit down a little bit just to try to get maximum traction. You want to put your weight to the outside peg to manipulate the bike to make it hook up as best you possibly can. I like to lug it a little bit so the bike is making traction and it doesn't want to step out on you. So I always like to be in maybe second gear, fan the clutch just a little bit and just keeping the front wheel down so the bike's just pulling you all the way up the hill, nice and smooth. The thing that you need to know about a downhill is obviously being in the right gear going down. A lot of people don't think it matters what gear you're in. You like to be actually in a gear higher, so when you're coming down the hill and your rear wheel hits a round rock, it's actually going to roll over the rock and keep going. If the thing's locked up, it's going to hit the rock and it's going to want to spit you sideways, and then you're going to be in a bad situation. So I always like to be in a gear high and keep the wheels turning at all times. So it actually rolls over the rocks and not catch them and spit you sideways. Turning coming down a hill like this, you obviously want to use your knees to manipulate the bike. You don't need to turn the handlebars too tight. It's all about standing up, feet on the pegs, toes on the pegs, and using your knees just to weight the bike on different positions to turn the bike. Maybe using your rear brake just a little bit to slide it a different direction, but not too much. As soon as you get yourself pointed in a different direction, let up on the brakes and let the bike freewheel down. Braking coming down this hill, you always want to have your finger on the front brake at all times. You never know if there might be like a big drop off or something down it. You always want to be tapping on the rear brake a little bit just to know that it's there. But you always want to keep forward momentum. You don't ever want to lock up the brake. So keep forward momentum, don't lock up the front brake or the rear brake, and just manipulate the bike by your knees and turning it. Okay, logs. Approaching logs, first thing you got to remember is be committed. It's just like hitting a double jump. If you're not committed, you know, obviously you're going to face the log and you're not going to get over it. Coming up to the log, approaching the log, you definitely want to load the front end a little bit, have your hand on the clutch, pop the front end up, let the front end maybe tap the top of the log, so then it'll allow the bike to even lift a little bit more, and then clutch it one more time and it'll pop the rear end over. Once the rear end is popped up over, you want to push your weight back, transfer your weight back, and commit to going over. So when you're approaching a log, when I say you need to load the front end, it's basically grab the front brakes a little bit and it loads the front end, front suspension. And once it loads the front suspension, it just gets a little bit more lift whenever you go to pop the clutch. That's what I meant by loading the front end. Not every log, you don't have to load the front end of every log. There's some logs where you probably want to lift it, the front end way before, and then just slam the bike up against it and just move on. Some logs you can hit at speed when they have maybe a little bit of dirt in front of them and it's more like a jump. Most logs are just laying in the woods and there's nothing in front of them. They're just, you know, dead logs, and you definitely have to slow down a little bit. You know, it's better to slow down and to get over the log than it is to hit the log and do a big old crash and, you know, end up hurting yourself or the bike and not getting to the next check or the next part of the race. Up and over, it helps a little bit, especially when the logs are bigger and they're wet. It helps, you know, get yourself up and over. So there's definitely different ways of doing it. You know, so you got to practice each way and you know, see which one's best for you. But my main thing is try to keep your feet on the pegs at all time. That's just less to worry about, less to get underneath the bike if you fall, you know, less to run over, and you know, just safer that way. If you can't do a 2-foot log, if you're having trouble on 2-foot logs, you definitely want to stay away from the 3 to 5-foot logs, because like I said, it can be disastrous. It would just be like a big endo. So if you're not ready for that, stay away from them, go around them, have your buddies help you get up and over them. But you know, there is ways to get them, and it is possible. It's just all technique. It's the same technique as doing the small logs, but it's at a bigger scale. So here we are, we're at a nice marbly cobblestone creek bed. You know, you want to keep your momentum going through it. You obviously need to just keep your fingers on the clutch at all times, just in case if it wants to step out on you. You want to be on your toes at all times, and just keeping the gas on consistently, no whiskey throttle, that like I explained before. Just keeping the throttle nice and smooth, and just being on your toes, just ready for anything. The bike could step out at any time. If you do dab, go ahead and let the bike dab and just try to pop back up as fast as you can. But like I said before, try to keep your fingers on the clutch at all times, just in case the bike does step out, and you know, it prevents your bike from stalling and just losing more time. we're here at a drop-off. There's two different ways to go off of the drop-offs. One is just to roll down it, and then the second way is just to blurb off of it and you know, jump down it almost. The first way I showed you was just rolling down it real nice and smooth. That's if it's really steep and has a really gnarly bottom to it, and maybe it's like a V. And if it's really, really tall, you obviously don't want to drop 15 to 30 feet down onto flat. So I would just roll off it really nice and smooth. To do that is just to get back on the bike a little bit, have your clutch and your front brake in your hand, riding your rear brake just a little bit. As soon as you transition off the crest of it, just let off of everything and let it just slope down. If it's really, really big and there's a big V at the bottom, obviously you need to be on the rear brake, maybe locking it up a little bit and using your front brake to slow you down. And then once you get to the very bottom of the crest, maybe give it just a little bit of gas so it'll pick the front end up just a little bit so it doesn't have such a big V. The second way is just to blurp right off of it like you're jumping off a little step down. When I came up to it, I would just get in the middle of the bike, just having your bike in the right gear, probably in first, second gear, and just using your clutch to get a little bit of oomph to pick the front end up so it doesn't drop the front end down. This one right here is pretty small, it's not that big, so on the average you'd probably just jump down it. You know, once they get really big and they're 15, 20 feet, obviously you don't want to jump down and land it flat land it, because it'd be pretty tough. You'd probably just want to roll down it real nice and smooth. Off cambers, whether it's a turn or a hillside, you definitely just want to be nice and smooth, easy on the throttle, weight your outside peg at all times, use your body to manipulate the bike a little bit, and almost to a coast, not get on the gas too hard, no whiskey throttle, real smooth, consistent throttle, and always weighting your outside peg. If you coast a little bit, the bike will two-wheel, and it'll be faster than trying to get on the gas and have the bike step out on you. You're going to fall down the hill. Water crossings. Entering water crossings, obviously you gotta look at them and make sure that they're not too deep and you're actually gonna be able to get across them. If they're up over your seat, you're gonna have a big problem. It's gonna suck water into your air filter and you're gonna be stuck in the middle of the pond or the river. So you definitely wanna make sure it's not too deep. First thing, when you come up to the water crossing, always have your finger on the clutch. I like to come in, entering fairly slow, and pick my feet up off the foot pegs so my feet stay dry. If you're on a long day ride, you definitely don't want wet feet for the rest of the day. So the don'ts of water crossing, obviously, is coming in really fast and just trying to make a big splash. Sometimes you'll come into them and they might be way too deep and you might just suck over the handlebars and you'll be stuck in the water. So obviously just come into them a little bit slower than you normally would, and just try to stay dry as possible. If you're on a long day ride, you definitely don't want to be wet all day. So mud is like sand. It's, you know, silty, thick sand. You always want to keep your momentum going. You definitely don't want to be dabbing a lot. You want to keep your feet up as much as possible. There is a few times where you're going to actually have your feet down. You're going to probably be dog paddling. But as much as you possibly can, just keep your feet on the foot pegs. It's a less chance of your feet or yourself getting hurt. You want to be in the center of the motorcycle. Keeps pressure on the front and rear tire, and you always want to keep the gas on a little bit, just a hair, maybe just to keep the bike tracking and it going the direction that you want it to go. Don'ts: being in the mud, being way too far forward on the bike, you know, being off the gas. There's so many don'ts in mud. I mean, being on the brakes all the time, locking the brakes up. You know, you always want to be in the center of the bike. You know, you always want to keep your momentum. You always want to keep your bike on the gas a little bit so it's getting full momentum. Your bike tracks a lot better when it's on the gas and you actually have power to the ground. So roots are really tough. A lot of people always have issues with roots, myself including. They are definitely a problem. First thing you got to remember about roots is try to hit them straight. If you can hit the roots straight, you're going to be better off and you get up and over them. You're not going to make mistakes and the rear end's not going to go sideways. If there is sideways roots, you want to lift the front end up, keep the momentum. It's all momentum. Keep the momentum. As soon as the rear end's going to hit the root, try to lighten up on the rear of the bike so it doesn't put so much pressure on the rear of the bike. So once you lighten up on the bike, it will actually want to pop up and over easier. So it's easier to recover if your rear end hits a root than it is if your front end hits a root. Normally, if your front end hits a root, you're going to be on your head in a matter of seconds, and it's going to ruin your day. So definitely try to pop your front end up over the roots, the logs, the little roots, wet roots. Riding on sand is much different than riding on hard pack. The difference is, when you're riding on sand, you're further back on the bike, you're having the gas on a little bit more, and you're not using your brakes as much. As soon as you chop the throttle, the bike is going to want to dive on you. If you're keeping the throttle on at all times, it's going to keep the front end light a little bit more, and it's going to keep your momentum up. In sand, you want to be in a much higher gear. You want to be floating. You don't want to be digging into the sand. When you're digging into the sand, your bike's higher RPM, you're wasting gas, and you're just beating your bike up. If you're higher gear, the bike's floating over the bumps a little bit more, and you're actually on top of it, and you're floating. The don'ts in sand is not cutting the corners as tight. You want to keep your momentum going around them. You want to keep your body position back. You don't want to be too far up on front of your bike. You want to be standing up most of the time. You don't want to be using your brakes as much. You want to just roll the throttle off and use that as your brake. Entering the whoops, the first thing you need to know is coming into them straight as possible is the most important thing. These whoops are mismatched, so some are higher than the others and some have angles, and there's rocks and stuff in them, so it's more like a trail section of whoops. So body positioning, coming into the whoops, elbows up, maybe a little bit further back on the bike than normal. You don't want to be too far on the front of the bike, because if the rear end's you're gonna be on the gas and the rear end's just gonna want to step out on you. So you want to be in central position, maybe a little bit further back than central position, just to keep the traction on the rear end of the bike. When I came into them, a little bit wheel high. Gearing, I was probably about a gear high. You always want to be in the right gear in the whoops. You don't want to be shifting going through the whoops because you can, possibly hit neutral or something. So you always want to be in the gear that you're going to be going through the whoops in. So I was probably around in third gear and came around the corner, went a little wide on the corner so I can come through the whoops a little straighter than normal. Front end high, and just kept the gas on, and just usually what I was trying to do is do a little wheel tap to get through some of the whoops to set me in the right position where I needed to go. The main thing is keeping the gas on at all times. As soon as you want to let off the gas, the bike is going to want to go sideways. So keep the gas on, it will keep you straighter through the whoops. You always want to be moving forward. Water bars. What you need to know about water bars is once you're coming down the water bars, and there's the really steep ones, you definitely do not use your rear brake. Do not lock your rear brake up. If you're locking your rear brake up, it's going to skid all the way up to the face, and then once you let go of the rear brake, it's going to want to kick you over the handlebars. I like to come up to the water bar, blurp the throttle just a hair, just to pop the front end up, lean your body back, and it will set you down the water bar or down the hill smooth. Line choice and reading the terrain is so important. Keep your momentum. Riding the edges of the track or the trail is always good line choice. In off-road, there's always really long races, and it's all about saving energy and saving yourself and your machine. So imagine car racing. You always think the inside is going to be the fastest, but in all reality, it's all about keeping your momentum and keeping the speed of your machine. And it's the same thing with off-road or dirt bike riding. It's all about keeping your momentum and setting up for the next corner. Being set up for 2 corners later is better than hitting that one corner the fastest you possibly can. Flowing everything together, making it all be one flow, just really smooth and consistent. It's always important to think ahead because you never know what's going to be around the corner. And it's always nice to be set up before you even get there. Sometimes it seems like it might be out of the way, but in all reality, it's the fastest, smoothest way, and it's going to get you through the smoothest and fastest way. So bike skills are very important in off-road. Dedicate a few minutes of your time when you go out to ride to learning your bike, to doing bike skills, riding over rocks, riding over logs, doing balancing techniques, doing side hills, maybe even doing some nose wheelies, even doing just regular wheelies. It's always benefits you in off-road is just having bike skills, just learning your bike, knowing what your bike's going to do in sticky situations. It's not about going fast, it's about just being able to be smooth and get over the situation that's in front of you.
near mud, but we've got a lot of mud, so.
Can you tell? Can you tell the mud? The water truck.
If you got mud.
Being a good, successful hill climber, you need to always be committed once you get to the hill climb. You can never second guess yourself. Going up a hill climb...
You don't have to yell. You can just talk like normal.
I'm talking to you!
I know, but I can hear you like I'm 4 feet away from you.
You don't have to yell. With my levers up so my elbows can sit down real low.
On my knees.
I can run my stabilizer on 8 the whole time, so then it doesn't turn and no head wobble ever. You can actually ride with no hands. Huh, Braxton?
You just lean.
You just lean.
I can ride my bike with no handlebars, no handlebars, no handlebars.